The kind of heat that made breathing feel like work, that turned metal into brand irons, that reduced human endurance to a mathematical equation of water intake versus sweat loss. The woman who descended the cargo ramp moved like smoke given form. She was small, compact, swallowed by plain gray fatigues that bore no rank, no unit patch, no name tape. Just fabric and a body beneath it. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that looked like it had been engineered rather than styled. She carried a single duffel bag in her left hand and a ruggedized equipment case in her right, and she moved with the kind of economy that suggested she'd calculated the precise number of calories required for each step and refused to spend one more than necessary. She was pale in a place where everyone was sunburned or tanned to leather. Her eyes were the color of slate in winter rain, and they moved constantly, scanning, cataloging, processing. They swept across the airstrip, the perimeter walls, the guard towers, the tangle of power lines and communication cables that formed the base's nervous system. She wasn't looking at the base the way a tourist looks at a monument. She was looking at it the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, identifying fractures, weaknesses, points of catastrophic failure. Waiting for her at the edge of the airstrip were three men. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Garrett stood at the center, because that's where Wade Garrett always stood. He was a man built like a linebacker who decided to become a battering ram, all shoulders and neck and jaw. His uniform was pressed to within an inch of its life. His sleeves rolled with a precision that bordered on obsessive, revealing forearms that looked like they'd been carved from oak and wrapped in sunburned leather. He wore his authority like cologne, thick and obvious, demanding to be noticed. To his right stood Corporal Bryce Holloway, 29 years old and 230 pounds of former college football muscle, slowly going soft around the edges. He had the kind of face that smiled easily, especially when someone else was being made smaller. His eyes were always on Garrett, waiting for the cue, ready to laugh on command. To his left was Corporal Travis Kendrick, 27, leaner, with the look of a man who'd learned early that the safest place to be was on the winning side. He had quick eyes and a quicker mouth, and he'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of laughing at Garrett's jokes half a second before anyone else. Loud enough to be heard, loud enough to matter. They watched the woman approach, and Garrett's face split into a grin that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with an audience. "What'd they send us?" he said, his voice carrying across the tarmac like an air horn. "A librarian? This is a combat zone, sweetheart." Holloway's laugh was instant, automatic, the bark of a dog that's been trained to respond to a whistle. Kendrick joined in half a beat later, his cackle higher pitched, more eager. The woman didn't break stride. She didn't look at them. She walked past the three Marines as if they were furniture, as if their words were a frequency her ears simply couldn't register. Her boots made no sound on the concrete. Her expression didn't change. She was a ghost moving through a world that couldn't touch her. It was the silence that unnerved them more than any retort ever could have. Garrett's grin faltered. Holloway's laugh died in his throat. Kendrick glanced at his sergeant, suddenly unsure. From the shadows of the headquarters building, another man watched. Master Gunnery Sergeant Silas Blackwood was 62 years old and looked like he'd been carved from the same sun-baked earth as the base itself. His face was a roadmap of 42 years of service, lines etched by everything from Berlin winters to Somali heat to Iraqi sandstorms. His hair was steel gray, cut high and tight in the old way, when regulations meant something and style meant nothing. His eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and they missed nothing. He'd been a Marine when Reagan was president. He'd pulled guard duty on the Berlin Wall when the Cold War was still cold, and the enemy still wore a uniform you could recognize. He'd seen colonels come and go like the seasons. He'd watched the Corps evolve, adapt, modernize, and through it all he'd remained what he'd always been, a quiet professional who measured men not by what they said, but by what they did when no one was watching. And right now he was watching Garrett make a mistake. Blackwood had seen this before. Different face, different year, but the same energy. Berlin, 1982. A civilian contractor, no name given, just a designation and a security clearance that made generals nervous. She'd arrived the same way this woman had arrived, quiet, incompetent, and utterly uninterested in the performance of military masculinity. She'd found a Soviet listening post tap on their secure communications line in 4 hours of freezing work that the signals intelligence team had missed for 3 months. She'd cut the wire herself, not bothering to report through channels, because the channels would have added delay, and delay would have added risk. The woman walking past Garrett now had that same energy, that same coiled precision, that same absolute certainty that the mission mattered more than the ego. Blackwood said nothing. He simply watched and waited. The mess hall at FOB Reaper was a study in calculated misery. Canvas walls stretched over a skeleton of aluminum poles. Fluorescent lights hummed their endless monotone dirge, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green that made even the healthiest skin look cadaverous. The air conditioning was a joke someone had stopped laughing at months ago. The heat pressed in through every gap in the canvas, turning the space into a convection oven that smelled of scorched coffee, diesel exhaust, and the particular funk of men living too close together for too long. It was 0730 hours, breakfast. 20 Marines sat at folding tables bolted to plywood floors, eating powdered eggs and drinking coffee that tasted like it had been brewed through a gym sock. Some talked in the low murmur of men conserving energy for a long day ahead. Others ate in silence, their eyes fixed on nothing, their minds already somewhere else. At the center table, holding court like a king on a throne made of MRE boxes, sat Gunnery Sergeant Wade Garrett. He was in full performance mode, his voice booming across the mess hall, his gestures broad and theatrical. He was telling a story about Desert Storm, about a Republican Guard position he'd helped overrun, about the look in the enemy's eyes when they'd realized the Americans weren't stopping, weren't slowing, weren't showing mercy. It was a story he'd told a dozen times, and it got better with each retelling. The enemy more numerous, the danger more acute, his own actions more heroic. Holloway and Kendrick sat on either side of him, their faces arranged in expressions of rapt attention, laughing at the right moments, nodding at the beats they'd heard before. They were his chorus, his affirmation, his proof that what he said mattered. Other Marines listened with varying degrees of interest, some genuinely engaged, remembering their own combat stories, others simply grateful for a distraction from the tedium. A few exchanged glances that suggested they'd heard this particular tale enough times to recognize the embellishments. At a corner table, as far from Garrett's performance as the geometry of the space allowed, sat the woman from the airstrip. She had not unpacked her gear. She had not changed her uniform. She had simply appeared at the mess hall at the designated time, taken a tray, filled it with food she didn't eat, and sat down alone. She sat perfectly still. Her back was straight, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her eyes fixed on the canvas wall opposite. She was not reading. She was not checking a phone. She was not fidgeting or tapping or engaging in any of the small movements that marked human restlessness. She was simply present, a statue of absolute stillness in a room full of motion. It was the stillness that drew the eye. The human brain is wired to notice movement, to track threats, to catalog the dynamic. But when something refuses to move, when it becomes a fixed point in a fluid environment, it becomes impossible to ignore. She was a black hole in the room's gravity, pulling attention not through action, but through its complete absence. Garrett noticed. He was halfway through describing the sound of incoming artillery when his eyes caught on her. The story faltered. His voice dropped. He turned his head fully to look at her, and his face arranged itself into an expression of theatrical confusion. "Look at that," he said, loud enough to cut through the ambient noise, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. Our systems analyst, just sitting there, not eating, not talking, not doing anything. The mess hall went quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to follow Garrett's gaze. The woman didn't react. She didn't turn her head. She didn't blink. If she registered the attention, she gave no sign. "What system are you analyzing, specialist?" Garrett continued, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "The color of the canvas? The pattern of the stains on the floor? Or are you just memorizing what real Marines look like so you can describe them in your little reports?" Holloway snickered. Kendrick joined in, louder. A few other Marines smiled, uncertain, not wanting to be left out of the joke, but not entirely sure what the joke was. Lieutenant Derek Ashford, sitting 2 tables away, felt his stomach twist. He was 26 years old, 3 months out of West Point, still shiny with the idealism they'd instilled in him about honor and duty and the dignity of service. He'd admired Garrett. The man was a veteran, a combat leader, someone who'd seen things Ashford could only imagine. But this felt wrong. This felt small. Still, the woman didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge that Garrett existed. And that, more than anything, was what set him off. Garrett stood. The scrape of his chair against the plywood was harsh, deliberate. He crossed the mess hall with heavy steps, his boots announcing his approach like war drums. He stopped in front of her table, looming, using his size the way he'd always used it, as a weapon, as proof of dominance. "I'm speaking to you, specialist," he said, his voice low now, dangerous. "When a senior non-commissioned officer addresses you, you respond. Do you understand me?" For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The mess hall held its breath. Then slowly, with the deliberate precision of a machine executing a program, the woman tilted her head. Her eyes lifted. They met Garrett's. There was nothing in them. No fear, no anger, no defiance. They were the eyes of a scientist observing a specimen through a microscope, cataloging data without judgment, without emotion. She was looking at him the way a mechanic looks at a malfunctioning engine, identifying the source of the noise, the point of failure. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, flat, utterly devoid of inflection. It sounded like a computer-generated voice reading a technical manual. "I count 23 critical infrastructure vulnerabilities on this base," she said. "Primary power regulator is operating at 340% of rated capacity. Tertiary generator fuel injectors show advanced corrosion due to 4 years of non-use. Server room HVAC system has sustained 40% coolant loss. Perimeter alarm relay at Tower 3 has exposed wiring vulnerable to environmental damage and hostile action. Your mess hall electrical panel shows carbon scoring consistent with electrical arcing. Water filtration system has a failing pressure valve. Communications antenna mounting brackets have metal fatigue. Fuel depot fire suppression system is offline. Medical equipment battery backup has 17% charge remaining. Should I continue?" The mess hall was silent. Garrett stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. His face was cycling through confusion, anger, disbelief. He'd expected submission or defiance. He'd gotten neither. He'd gotten a data dump delivered with the emotional weight of a weather report. "I didn't ask for your opinion," he said finally, his voice tight. "You asked what system I'm analyzing," she replied, her tone unchanged. "That is the answer." She returned her gaze to the wall. The conversation was over. Not because she'd won or lost, but because it had served its purpose. She'd answered his question. There was nothing more to say. Garrett stood there for another 3 seconds, his fists clenched, his jaw working. Then he turned and walked back to his table, his movements stiff, robotic. He sat down heavily. He did not resume his story. Holloway and Kendrick exchanged glances, unsure how to react. The joke had died. The performance had failed. For the first time in recent memory, Wade Garrett's voice was silent. Ashford watched the woman. She'd returned to her stillness, unchanged, unaffected. And he realized with sudden clarity that she hadn't been trying to humiliate Garrett. She'd simply been answering his question with the precision of someone for whom social performance was irrelevant and data was everything. Blackwood, watching from the corner where he'd been drinking coffee that had long since gone cold, allowed himself the ghost of a smile. He'd seen this before, and he knew how it would end. At 14:08 hours, specialist Maya Brennan submitted her formal infrastructure assessment report. It was 47 pages, single-spaced, dense with technical terminology, mathematical probability calculations, electrical load diagrams, and failure cascade projections. It cataloged every vulnerability she'd identified in her first 72 hours on base. It prioritized them by criticality and timeline. It provided step-by-step remediation protocols. It concluded with a single sentence in bold text. Without immediate corrective action, catastrophic system failure is probable within 72 hours. Confidence interval, 87%. The report was filed electronically through the base's internal network. It was addressed to Gunnery Sergeant Wade Garrett, acting base commander in the absence of the commissioned officer who'd been medevaced out 3 weeks prior with a ruptured appendix. At 14:10 hours, 90 seconds after receiving the notification of the report's arrival, Garrett deleted it. He didn't read past the executive summary. He didn't examine the technical details. He didn't forward it to anyone else for review. He simply highlighted the file and pressed delete, and the report vanished into the digital void as if it had never existed. Corporal Kendrick was in the office when it happened. He'd been filing patrol reports, trying to look busy while actually thinking about the care package his sister had promised to send. "What was that, Gunny?" he asked, glancing at Garrett's screen. "Another pencil pusher trying to justify her salary," Garrett said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who'd just taken out the trash. 47 pages of doomsday scenarios and sky is falling panic. We've been running this base for 8 months without incident. You think I'm going to let some civilian contractor who's been here 3 days tell me how to do my job? "What if she's right?" Kendrick asked. He regretted it immediately. Garrett's head swiveled, his eyes narrowed. "She's not," he said, his voice flat. "And even if systems need maintenance, which they don't, we handle it on our timeline, not based on some consultant's panic attack. She's probably trying to scare up extra funding for her company. That's how these people work. They find problems that don't exist so they can bill hours fixing them." Kendrick nodded, backing down. Yeah, that makes sense. But in the adjacent room, separated by nothing but a thin partition and years of experience, Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood had heard every word. He said nothing. He simply opened his own terminal and accessed the base's electronic filing system. He found the report in the deleted items folder. He downloaded it. He saved it to an encrypted drive. And then he began to read. 40 minutes later, he sat back in his chair, his face carved from stone. She was right. About everything, and Garrett had just condemned them all. The sun was setting when Garrett decided to make his final point. The mess hall was filling up for evening chow. Marines filed in, tired from patrol rotations and equipment maintenance, and the endless, grinding tedium of life on a forward operating base in a war that most of them couldn't explain and none of them could win. Garrett was already there, center table, court in session. He'd spent the afternoon working himself up, nursing his wounded pride, building a narrative in which he was the decisive leader and the woman was the problem that needed solving. When Maya Brennan entered at 18:30 hours, walking with that same economical precision to the same corner table, Garrett was ready. "Looks like our analyst is back," he announced, his voice booming across the space. "Probably spent the day writing another novel-length report about how we're all doing everything wrong." Laughter from his table, nervous glances from others. Maya didn't react. She filled her tray. She walked to her table. She sat down. Garrett stood. He'd been waiting for this, planning it, rehearsing the lines in his head. "I got your little report, specialist," he said, walking toward her with deliberate slowness. "All 47 pages of doom and gloom. You know what I did with it?" She didn't look at him. "I deleted it," he continued. "Didn't even finish reading it. Know why?" Still no response. "Because this is a Marine Corps forward operating base, not a college engineering lab. We don't need some woman who probably never held a rifle telling us how to do our jobs. We've been running this base just fine without your help, and we'll keep running it just fine after you're gone." The mess hall was silent now. Everyone watching, everyone waiting. Maya set down the fork she'd been holding. She stood, her movements fluid, efficient. She turned to face Garrett directly for the first time. "Your operational timeline is incorrect," she said, her voice as flat as ever. "Based on current load patterns and component degradation rates, you have approximately 48 hours remaining before primary power failure. Subsequent cascade will affect communications, medical systems, water purification, and perimeter security. Probability of casualties, significant. Your assessment that systems are fine is inconsistent with observable data." Garrett's face flushed red. "You don't talk to me like that. I'm providing factual assessment based on technical analysis. Emotional response is not part of my operational parameters. You think you're smart? You think your fancy reports mean anything? I'm the commanding NCO of this installation. I decide what's a threat and what's not. And right now, the biggest threat to morale and good order on this base is you." She looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she turned and began walking toward the exit. "Where do you think you're going?" Garrett demanded. "You've indicated my input is unwelcome. I'm returning to my quarters." "No," Garrett said, and his voice carried a finality that made several Marines sit up straighter. "You're leaving my base. Holloway, Kendrick, escort this specialist to the front gate." Lieutenant Ashford stood abruptly. "Gunny, she's assigned here by higher command. You can't just—" "I'm the commanding NCO of this installation, Lieutenant," Garrett cut him off. "I decide who stays and who goes. And she goes. Now." Holloway and Kendrick moved to flank Maya. They didn't grab her, didn't touch her, but their presence was clear. An escort, a perp walk. Maya walked. She didn't protest, didn't argue, didn't appeal to anyone for support. She simply walked, flanked by 2 Marines who wouldn't meet her eyes, through the mess hall where 50 men watched in silence, out into the fading purple light of an Afghan evening. They walked her to the front gate, past the guard towers, past the concrete barriers, past the razor wire that marked the boundary between the illusion of control and the reality of chaos. 50 meters outside the wire, Kendrick stopped. "This is far enough," he said, his voice quiet. "Nothing personal, ma'am." "Everything is personal to men like your sergeant," Maya replied. "That's why systems fail." She walked another 20 meters. Then she stopped. She knelt, placed her palm flat against the sun-baked earth, closed her eyes. Through the ground, she felt it. The vibration, the frequency, the harmonic signature of machinery running beyond its design specifications. Components wearing against each other, generating heat and friction, and the particular resonance of imminent failure. She checked her watch. 1847 hours. She touched the small device behind her ear, concealed beneath her hair, sub-vocalized, barely moving her lips. "Overwatch, this is SCU-7. Seismic signature indicates imminent cascade. Primary regulator failure in 4 to 6 minutes." The response came through bone conduction, inaudible to anyone else. "Acknowledge, 7. Rules of engagement remain unchanged. Observe only unless life-critical threshold is met." "Understood," she whispered. She didn't walk away. She found a rock, sat on it, and watched the base, waiting. Inside the wire, Garrett returned to the mess hall triumphant. He clapped Holloway on the shoulder, shook Kendrick's hand, accepted the nervous congratulations of Marines who weren't sure what they just witnessed, but knew better than to question it. "That's leadership," he announced. "Decisive action. Can't let support personnel undermine combat readiness. Sometimes you have to make the hard calls." Most of the Marines nodded. A few looked uncomfortable. Ashford stared at his tray, his appetite gone. And Blackwood stood, set down his coffee mug, and walked out without a word. He went to the tertiary generator, the one that hadn't been used in 4 years, the one that was supposed to be the last-ditch backup if everything else failed. He opened the access panel, examined the fuel injectors. They were exactly as corroded as Maya had described, precisely as damaged as she documented. He could see the green patina of oxidation, the crystallized deposits, the degraded rubber seals. He pulled out a field phone kit from a storage locker nearby. Korean War vintage, actual physical wire on spools. The kind of communication system that worked when everything else failed because it didn't depend on anything except copper and physics. He began running cable. From the generator housing to the command post. Physical, manual, old school. Ashford found him 15 minutes later. "Master Guns, what are you doing?" Blackwood didn't stop working. "Preparing for the inevitable, Lieutenant." "What inevitable?" Blackwood looked at him. His pale blue eyes held decades of experience, of pattern recognition, of knowing how stories ended before they began. "That woman knew exactly when it would happen," he said, "and Garrett just made sure we'd have no one here to fix it when it does." At 18:53 hours, exactly 6 minutes after Maya's prediction, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then they died. The darkness was absolute for half a second. Then emergency reds kicked in, battery-powered, casting everything in hellish crimson shadows. They lasted 3 seconds before they too failed, their batteries drained from months of inadequate charging cycles. The base went dark. And in that darkness, alarms began to scream. The perimeter breach alarm, its klaxon wail cutting through the night. The generator failure alarm, a deep, guttural horn. The medical equipment alarm from the aid station, high-pitched and frantic. They layered on top of each other, a symphony of systemic collapse. In the command post, lit only by chemical glow sticks, Garrett stood frozen. Around him, Marines moved in controlled chaos. Someone shouted for communications. Someone else ran for the backup generator. A third grabbed a flashlight and headed for the aid station. But Garrett stood still. His face, illuminated by the sickly green glow, showed the precise moment when performance meets reality and shatters. "Get comms online," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Sir, the system is completely down," a corporal yelled back. "Then get the backup generator running." "We're trying, Gunny, but the breakers are fused." Outside, a single shot cracked through the darkness. The sharp, definitive report of a precision rifle. The perimeter alarm abruptly went silent, its relay severed by a .308 round from 600 meters out. Then came the sound of panicked, automatic fire from Tower 3, unaimed bursts spraying into the darkness at shadows and fear. Garrett spun toward the window. "Who authorized weapons free? Who's shooting? Get me a sit rep." But there could be no sit rep. There were no communications. The radios were dead. The internal network was dead. The satellite uplink was dead. The base had been struck blind, deaf, and mute, and it was bleeding into the darkness. "What do we do?" Holloway asked, and his voice carried the edge of panic. Garrett looked at him, opened his mouth. No words came. Outside the wire, 70 meters away, Maya Brennan stood. She'd felt the exact moment of failure through the soles of her boots. She'd counted the seconds until the cascade. She'd heard the alarms, the gunshot, the chaos. She touched her throat mic. "Life-critical threshold met," she said quietly. "I'm going back in." "Acknowledged, 7. You are authorized for full corrective measures. Good hunting." Maya picked up her equipment case. She began walking back toward the gate, Her stride was unhurried, purposeful, the walk of someone who'd seen this coming, who'd prepared for it, who knew exactly what needed to be done and exactly how long she had to do it. Behind her, the Afghan night stretched vast and indifferent. Ahead, FOB Reaper burned with chemical light in fear. And somewhere in the command post, Master Gunnery Sergeant Silas Blackwood picked up his field phone, the one piece of equipment still functioning, and keyed the handset. "Gate 1, this is Blackwood." "Gate 1, go ahead," came the response. "The specialist, when she arrives at your position, you tell her the threshold has been met. You tell her Master Guns said to fix it. All of it, whatever she needs. You understand?" Yes, Master Guns. But Gunny Garrett said, "Sergeant Garrett just proved he doesn't know what he's doing." Blackwood cut him off, his voice hard as iron. "The specialist does. When she gets there, you help her. That's an order." He hung up, looked at Ashford, who'd been listening. "You're about to get an education, Lieutenant," Blackwood said quietly, "about the difference between the man who talks the loudest and the one who actually knows what the hell they're doing." Outside, Maya reached the gate. The two Marines there raised their rifles, more from training than threat assessment. "Ma'am, you can't come back in," Private Ellis stammered. "Gunny's orders." Maya looked at him. Her slate-gray eyes reflected the distant glow of chemical lights. "Your perimeter alarm is offline because the relay at Tower 3 had exposed wiring which was severed by a precision .308 round from the eastern ridge, approximately 580 meters. The subsequent automatic fire from your tower was panic response, not aimed fire. You are currently blind, deaf, and bleeding. I can stop the bleeding. Lower your weapons." Ellis hesitated. His partner, Private Warren Cole, glanced at the darkened base behind them. "Master Guns said to help you," Cole said quietly. "Said you'd know what to do." Maya nodded once. "I need your toolkit." Ellis handed it over without question. Maya knelt beside the gate control panel. Her hands moved with surgical precision, stripping wires, bypassing circuits, creating new pathways with nothing but copper, physics, and absolute certainty. 90 seconds later, a green light flickered to life on the panel. The field phone crackled. Maya picked it up. "Gate 1 to any station. Communications check." Static. Then, "Command post, we read you clear." Blackwood's voice. "Welcome back, Specialist." In the command post, Garrett heard her voice, and his face went white. "Who authorized her back inside?" he demanded. Ashford looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Gunny," he said quietly, "does it matter? She just gave us communications." Garrett opened his mouth to respond. Then the lights in the aid station flickered back to life, dim but present. Then a console in the command post powered up. Then voices began coming through the field phone network, coordinated, professional, fixing problems. And Garrett realized, in that moment of dawning horror, that the woman he'd kicked out was now the only thing standing between his Marines and disaster. Outside, Maya set down the phone and looked at the base. Her expression didn't change. She simply picked up her equipment case and began walking toward the tertiary generator. There was work to do, and she was very, very good at her work. The aid station smelled of blood and antiseptic and fear. Navy Corpsman First Class Owen Sterling was drowning, not in water, but in the impossible mathematics of triage when the tools of modern medicine had suddenly reverted to the 19th century. He stood over 3 unconscious Marines, his hands working the bag valve mask on the most critical patient, manually forcing air into lungs that couldn't function on their own. His arms burned, his shoulders screamed. The rhythm had to be perfect. Too fast and he'd hyperventilate the patient. Too slow and brain damage would begin within minutes. The ventilator sat silent beside him, its screen black, its mechanisms useless without power. The battery backup indicator blinked a desperate crimson. 4 minutes remaining. 4 minutes until the machine that had been breathing for Lance Corporal Danny Morrison, 20 years old, chest full of shrapnel from yesterday's IED strike, became an expensive paperweight. 4 minutes until Sterling would have to make a choice no medical professional should ever have to make. Which of his 3 critical patients would get the manual bag, and which 2 would be allowed to slip away into the darkness while he tried to save one? He was still trying to solve that equation when the door opened and a woman walked in. She was small, pale, moving with the kind of precision that suggested every calorie of energy had been calculated and accounted for. She carried a ruggedized equipment case in one hand. Her gray fatigues had dust on them now, and a streak of something that might have been grease or might have been dirt across one shoulder. Her eyes swept the room in less than 2 seconds, scanning, cataloging, processing. "You have 3 minutes and 40 seconds of battery power remaining," she said. Her voice was flat, clinical, the tone of someone reading data from a screen. "Patient 1 is most critical. Patient 2 can tolerate manual ventilation for up to 6 hours if necessary. Patient 3's oxygen saturation is acceptable for temporary removal from mechanical support." Sterling stared at her, his hands never stopping their rhythmic compression of the bag. "Who the hell are you?" "Specialist Maya Brennan. I'm here to restore your power." "The power's gone. The whole grid is down. The generators are fried. We're on battery backup and it's dying." "I'm aware." She set down her case, opened it. Inside was a chaos of tools, wire, components that Sterling didn't recognize. "I need your defibrillator paddles and 2 bags of intravenous saline." Sterling's hands faltered for half a beat. "What? Why? He's not in cardiac arrest, he's in respiratory." "The saline is a conductor," she interrupted, already moving toward the crash cart. "The defibrillator provides the connection interface. I'm going to hotwire the ventilator to an external power source." "That's impossible. You can't just—" "I can." She pulled the defibrillator paddles from their housing, examined the cables with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond. "The ventilator requires 120 volts AC at 60 Hertz, approximately 400 watts. A standard vehicle battery provides 12 volts DC. I'll need to create a voltage step-up conversion and invert the current from direct to alternating. The saline provides ionic conductivity for fine voltage regulation. The process is theoretically unsound, but practically functional." She was already moving as she spoke. She disappeared through the door and returned 30 seconds later dragging a 60-pound MRAP battery, its terminals still connected to short lengths of cable. How she'd moved it that fast, that far, Sterling couldn't begin to guess. 2 minutes 30 seconds, she said, setting the battery on the floor beside the ventilator. Her hands moved with a speed and certainty that Sterling had only seen in surgeons, the kind who'd done the same procedure 1,000 times, whose muscle memory was so ingrained that conscious thought was no longer necessary. She tore the power cable from the wall-mounted defibrillator, stripped both ends with a combat knife that appeared from somewhere on her belt. The copper cores gleamed in the chemical glow-stick light. She connected the positive lead to the battery's positive terminal using a C-clamp from her kit, wrapped the connection 3 times with electrical tape, tested it with a multimeter that she produced from a pocket, nodded once. Then she grabbed the 2 IV saline bags, tore them open with her teeth, and poured the contents into a metal bedpan. The liquid sloshed, reflecting the red emergency lights. "What are you doing?" Sterling demanded, but his voice had lost its edge. He was watching her the way a drowning man watches a rope being thrown. "Creating an ionic bridge for current regulation." She submerged the defibrillator paddles in the saline bath, positioned them precisely 6 inches apart, took the negative battery lead and wrapped it around the ventilator's power input plug. Saline solution contains sodium chloride. Dissolved ionic compounds conduct electricity. I'm using it as a liquid resistor to prevent voltage spike from destroying the ventilator's control board. 1 minute 40 seconds, Sterling whispered, his eyes on the battery indicator. Maya's hands didn't shake, didn't hesitate. She made 3 more connections, tested each with the multimeter, adjusted the paddle positions in the saline by millimeters. Then she looked at Sterling. When I complete this circuit, there will be a spark. The ventilator will go completely dark for approximately 2 seconds. Do not stop manual ventilation during that time. On the 3rd second, the machine will restore. If it doesn't, I've killed your patient. Do you understand? Sterling's mouth was dry. Do it. Maya touched the final connection. The spark was blue-white and violent. It lit up the room for a fraction of a second, accompanied by a sharp crack of discharge. The ventilator screen went black. Sterling's hands squeezed the bag. Once, twice, the screen flickered. Then it lit up, the display washing the room in pale, blue illumination. The ventilator hummed back to life, its bellows beginning their rhythmic compression. The pressure indicator showed normal. The oxygen saturation sensor climbed from 83% back toward 95%. The sound of the machine breathing was the most beautiful thing Owen Sterling had ever heard. He stared at Maya Brennan, this small woman with slate-gray eyes and grease on her hands, and for the first time in his medical career, he understood what people meant when they said they'd witnessed a miracle. That battery will power this ventilator for approximately 4 hours and 12 minutes, Maya said, already packing her tools. Which of the other 2 patients is second priority? Sterling's throat was tight. Patient 2, gunshot wound, stable, but needs monitoring. I'll return with a second battery in 6 minutes. She picked up her case, turned toward the door. Specialist, Sterling said. She paused, looked back. Thank you. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes just for a moment. Something that might have been human beneath the machine. Then she was gone, moving into the darkness with purpose and certainty, and Sterling returned to his vigil over the 3 lives she just pulled back from the edge. The tertiary generator sat in a corner of the base that most Marines forgot existed. It was housed in a weather-beaten metal shed that rattled in the wind and baked in the sun, a forgotten relic from the early days of the base's construction. 4 years ago, it had been designated as emergency backup. Then the budget had been cut, maintenance had been deferred, and slowly, inevitably, it had slipped from backup to forgotten to might as well not exist. Chief Warrant Officer Helen Voss stood in front of it now, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the kind of mechanical carnage that made engineers want to weep. She was 44 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with hands scarred by a lifetime of wrestling with machinery that didn't want to cooperate. She'd been a Marine engineer for 22 years. She'd coaxed life from equipment in conditions that ranged from Iraqi heat to Afghan cold to the rolling decks of amphibious assault ships in storm seas. She was good at her job, possibly the best on the base, and she was looking at the tertiary generator with the sick certainty that this was a problem even she couldn't fix. The fuel injection system was a disaster. The injectors themselves were corroded to the point of uselessness, caked with crystallized deposits and oxidation. The fuel lines were cracked rubber that crumbled when she touched them. The ignition system was seized. The cooling system was dry, its reservoir cracked and leaking. "It's no good," she said to the Marines who'd followed her. "This thing hasn't been run in 4 years. Even if we could get fuel to it, even if we could turn it over, it'd shake itself apart in 30 seconds. We'd need a week and a full machine shop to make this operational." "Then we're dead," someone said in the darkness. "We're working on alternatives," Voss replied, but her voice lacked conviction. That's when she heard the voice on the field phone network, calm and certain and utterly without doubt. "All stations, this is Specialist Brennan. Primary and secondary power are unrecoverable. Tertiary generator has not been maintained and is currently non-functional. I am implementing emergency protocol. Microgrid creation from tertiary unit after field repair. Estimated restoration time for critical systems, 47 minutes. Aid station is priority 1. Chief Voss, meet me at generator 3 with all copper wiring you can carry, C-clamp, and impact driver." Voss stared at the field phone handset. She'd heard of Maya Brennan, the analyst Garrett had kicked off the base an hour ago. The woman who'd apparently walked back in and rewired the gate communications in 90 seconds. But this was insane. You couldn't repair a generator this damaged in 47 minutes. It was physically impossible. Then Garrett's voice came through, blustering, panicked. "Belay that! I didn't authorize." Voss made a decision. She'd been in the Corps long enough to recognize competence when she heard it. And right now, in the darkness, with lives on the line, she'd take competence over rank every single time. "With respect, Gunny," she said into the handset, "you're not qualified to authorize anything related to power systems. I'm going." She gathered her tools, copper wiring spooled over her shoulder, C-clamp in one hand, impact driver in the other. She headed back toward Generator 3. Maya Brennan was already there when she arrived, kneeling beside the machine, her hands moving over it with the confidence of a surgeon examining a familiar patient. "Fuel system is unrecoverable," Maya said without preamble. "We'll bypass it entirely. Ignition system is seized. We'll use manual ignition. Cooling system is compromised. We'll create an external cooling loop. The generator housing itself is sound. The engine block is functional. Everything else we can improvise." "Improvise with what?" Voss demanded. "We don't have parts. We don't have time. We have a refueling truck with 400 gallons of diesel," Maya interrupted. "We have a fire hose from the vehicle wash station that can serve as a fuel line. We have a coolant reservoir from a destroyed HMMWV in the vehicle graveyard. We have all the copper wiring on this base. We have physics. That's sufficient." She stood, her eyes meeting Voss's. In the darkness, by flashlight, they looked almost luminous. "I need you to trust me, Chief. Can you do that?" Voss had worked with a lot of people over 2 decades. She'd learned to sort them quickly. The talkers and the doers. The ones who knew their limits and the ones who'd get you killed with their overconfidence. Maya Brennan wasn't overconfident. She was simply certain. There was a difference. "What do you need?" Voss asked. Maya smiled. It was the first expression Voss had seen on her face, and it was barely there, just a tiny quirk at the corner of her mouth. But it was there. "Everything," Maya said, "and I need it 5 minutes ago." They worked like a surgical team. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. Maya would point, and Voss would understand. Voss would hand over a tool, and Maya's hand would already be reaching for it. They siphoned diesel from the refueling truck, running the fire hose directly to the generator's intake manifold, bypassing the entire ruined fuel injection system. Maya created a manual throttle valve using a C-clamp and a section of rebar, effectively turning the precision fuel injection into a crude but functional gravity feed system. The ignition system was seized beyond salvation, so they abandoned it entirely. Maya found a destroyed HMMWV in the vehicle graveyard, pulled the hand crank from its emergency kit, a relic from an era when vehicles were simple enough to start manually, and jury-rigged it to the generator's crankshaft with a length of chain and some creative welding using a portable torch. The cooling system was rebuilt from scavenged parts, a coolant reservoir from another dead vehicle, a water pump jury-rigged from the vehicle wash station's pressure system, and a network of copper pipes that Maya bent by hand into the precise angles needed for flow. 40 minutes into the work, Voss realized she was no longer leading. She was assisting. Maya had taken command not through rank or volume, but through pure, undeniable competence. Every decision was correct. Every improvisation worked. Every solution was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its effectiveness. It was like watching a grandmaster play chess against amateurs. You could see the moves 3 steps ahead, the way each decision cascaded into the next, building toward an inevitable conclusion. At one point, as Maya was torquing down a connection with a wrench, Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood appeared from the darkness. He didn't announce himself, just materialized like a ghost, a coil of copper wire over one shoulder. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly, offering the wire. Maya took it, nodded once. "Thank you, Master Guns." Blackwood watched her work for a moment, his weathered face unreadable in the flashlight glow. "Woman I met in Berlin, 1982, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She moved like you do. Like every motion has been calculated, like wasted effort is a sin." Maya's hand stopped. She looked up at Blackwood. "Her name was Catherine Brennan," Maya said quietly. "She was my mother." The words hung in the darkness between them. Blackwood's face shifted through a series of emotions: recognition, grief, understanding, respect. It all happened in the space of 3 seconds, and then his face was stone again, but his eyes held something that might have been reverence. "She taught you," he said. "She died teaching me," Maya replied. "September 11th, 2001. Pentagon server room. She was trying to restore backup communications for first responders. Protocol said, wait for authorization. She didn't wait, but authorization was delayed. Chain of command confusion. By the time they approved her actions, the fire had reached the room. They found her with her hands still on the equipment. Voss felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd been at Camp Lejeune on September 11th, watching the towers fall on a television in the common room, feeling the world shift beneath her feet. "I was 8 years old," Maya continued, her voice still flat, but with something beneath it now, something raw. "In the daycare center, 2 floors below where she died. When they finally evacuated us, I asked where my parents were. They said they were working. They were always working. It took 3 more hours before someone told me they weren't coming home." She returned to the generator, her hands moving again, faster now, with a kind of desperate precision. Systems fail when humans prioritize protocol over action, hierarchy over necessity, chain of command over mission. "I will not wait for authorization when I have the capability to prevent failure. I will not let people die because someone needs to sign a form or get approval from someone 3 levels up who doesn't understand the technical realities. My mother died waiting. I won't." Blackwood and Voss exchanged a look. No words needed. They both understood now. Maya Brennan wasn't just an analyst or an engineer. She was a weapon forged in the fires of the worst day in American history, sharpened by grief and purpose, aimed at the single mission of ensuring that systems never failed the way they'd failed her. "What do you need from us?" Blackwood asked. "I need you to get out of my way and let me work," Maya said. Then softer, "And I need someone to be ready at the command post. When this generator comes online, we'll have about 60 seconds to route power before the surge trips every breaker on the base. Someone needs to be at the distribution panel to manually configure the circuit priorities." "I'll go," Voss said immediately. "What's the sequence?" Maya rattled off a series of technical instructions that would have taken most engineers 5 minutes to write down. Voss absorbed them all, nodded once, and disappeared into the darkness at a run. Blackwood remained. "What can I do?" Maya pointed to a massive lever that she'd constructed from rebar and a length of chain. "When I give the signal, you throw that switch. It's a manual circuit breaker, crude but effective. The initial surge will be violent. Don't let go no matter what happens. If you release it in the first 3 seconds, the feedback will destroy the generator's control systems." "Understood." Maya made 3 more connections, adjusted the fuel valve, checked the cooling lines. Then she moved to the hand crank, gripped it with both hands, and looked at Blackwood. "Ready?" He positioned himself at the lever. "Ready." Maya began to crank, slowly at first, building momentum. The generator's crankshaft resisted, seized from years of disuse. She cranked harder. Her arms trembled with effort. Sweat appeared on her forehead despite the cooling night air. The crankshaft turned. Once, twice, the engine coughed. "Now!" Maya shouted. Blackwood threw the switch. The generator roared to life with a sound like a dragon waking from slumber. Black smoke belched from the exhaust. The entire housing shook violently. Blackwood held the lever with both hands, his muscles straining, his feet braced against the ground as the feedback tried to throw him back. Maya didn't step away. She adjusted the fuel valve with one hand, fine-tuning the mixture, bringing the violent roar down to a steady, powerful rumble. The smoke cleared, the shaking subsided, the generator was running. In the command post, Voss's hands flew across the distribution panel, throwing breakers in the exact sequence Maya had specified. And one by one, across FOB Reaper, lights began to flicker back to life. The aid station blazed with illumination. The command post console powered up. The water purification system hummed back into operation. The perimeter lights threw back the darkness. From everywhere across the base, a cheer erupted. Marines who'd been working in darkness and fear suddenly had light and hope. The sound rolled across the compound like a wave, voices raised in relief and disbelief and joy. Maya stood beside the generator, her hands still on the controls, her face illuminated by the newly restored lights. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, just made one final adjustment to the fuel mixture, confirmed the temperature was stable, and then stepped back. 4 hours and 12 minutes of stable power, she said to Blackwood, sufficient for aid station operations and critical communications. I'll work on restoring the primary grid tomorrow. Blackwood stared at her. This small woman who just performed what he would have sworn was impossible. How did you know it would work? He asked. I didn't, she replied, picking up her equipment case. But the probability was acceptable, and the alternative was unacceptable, so I made it work. She started walking toward the perimeter wall, where the single shot had come from, where the real threat still waited in the darkness. Where are you going? Blackwood called after her. To deal with the infiltrator, she said without turning around. The power failure wasn't an accident. Someone was testing our response, and now they're about to find out what happens when the system corrects itself. The southern perimeter wall was where the shot had come from. Maya found Blackwood already there when she arrived, his rifle held at low ready, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the wire with the patience of a man who'd spent decades on night watch. He heard her approach. Her footsteps were silent, but he'd been expecting her. Single shooter, he said quietly. Professional. That was a 580-meter shot in failing light, hitting a target the size of a softball. He's not trying to breach, he's testing response capability. Maya knelt beside him, pulling out her tablet. The screen glowed pale blue in the darkness. On it was a thermal overlay of the terrain beyond the wire, fed from a micro UAV that she'd apparently deployed at some point during the chaos. When or how, Blackwood didn't ask. Target is server room, she said, her eyes tracking something on the screen. He assumes electronic locks failed with power loss. Standard infiltration doctrine. Disable infrastructure, wait for panic response, exploit chaos to access high-value intelligence assets. Smart, Blackwood acknowledged. If this was a normal base, he'd be right. Electronic locks would be dead. Security would be running around like headless chickens. Perfect time to slip in, download everything from the classified servers, and vanish. But this isn't a normal base, Maya said, and he made two incorrect assumptions, which are, first, that the server room security is tied to the main power grid. It's not. It runs on a closed-circuit chemical battery system designed to survive electromagnetic pulse attacks. The locks are still functional. The cameras are still recording. The intrusion detection system is still active. Blackwood allowed himself a small smile. And second, that no one is watching. Maya tapped her screen. A thermal signature appeared, moving with careful precision through the rocks beyond the wire, angling toward the windowless concrete building that housed the classified servers. I'm watching. They observed in silence as the figure approached. He moved well, textbook infiltration technique, using available cover, timing his movements to avoid sightlines from the guard towers. He reached the building's entrance, produced a toolkit, and set to work on what he believed was a dead electronic lock. Maya keyed into the field phone network. "Command post, this is Brennan. I have visual confirmation of hostile operative at server facility. Single individual, adult male, approximately 80 kilograms, moving with professional training. He is currently attempting to breach the entrance. Stand by for defensive measures." In the command post, Garrett's voice came through, confused and angry. "What defensive measures? That building doesn't have defensive measures." Maya ignored him. She was typing on her tablet, accessing systems that Garrett didn't know existed, that weren't on any official base schematic, that she'd quietly installed during her 3 days of observation before he'd kicked her out. On her screen, a new interface appeared. Server Facility Defense Grid. Status, armed. She watched the infiltrator work. He was good. In another 30 seconds, he'd realized the lock was still active. In 40 seconds, he'd switch to a different approach. In 60 seconds, he'd be inside, downloading classified information that could compromise operations across 3 provinces. Maya didn't give him 60 seconds. "Execute," she said calmly, and pressed a button on her screen. At the server building, hell erupted. High-intensity strobes ignited with the force of 10,000 lumens, military-grade illumination designed for crowd dispersal. They burned white-hot, banishing every shadow, turning night into noon in the space of a heartbeat. Simultaneously, sonic emitters activated. Not sound in any musical sense, but pressure waves at 140 decibels, specifically tuned to the frequencies that caused maximum human disorientation. The infiltrator cried out, his hands flying to his ears, his eyes clamped shut against the searing light. He stumbled backward, trying to retreat, trying to escape. That's when the foam hit him. It erupted from concealed ports embedded in the building's walls. Military-grade riot control foam, thick and viscous and fast hardening. It covered him in seconds, wrapping around his legs, his torso, his arms, immobilizing him as effectively as concrete. He went down, cocooned, helpless, his muffled shouts barely audible over the sonic assault. Maya counted to 5, then deactivated the systems. The lights died. The sound cut off. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the infiltrators' gasping breaths. Security teams converged from 3 directions, weapons raised, moving with the controlled aggression of professionals who knew the threat was already neutralized, but weren't taking chances. They secured him in 40 seconds, zip-tied his hands, cut away enough foam to confirm he was breathing, searched him for weapons and found a tactical knife, a suppressed pistol, and an encrypted tablet. The entire engagement had taken less than 20 seconds from activation to completion. Clean, non-lethal, surgical. Blackwood looked at Maya with something approaching awe. "How long has that system been there?" 72 hours, Maya replied, already packing her tablet. "I installed it the first night. Standard SCU protocol. Identify critical assets. Establish defensive measures. Don't ask permission because the answer is always, that's not in the budget." "What's on his tablet?" Maya's eyes went cold. "That's what I'm going to find out." She walked over to where the security team had laid out the infiltrator's equipment, picked up the tablet. Her fingers moved across its surface with the same precision she'd applied to everything else. Bypassing encryption was apparently as natural to her as breathing. 30 seconds later, her face went still. That absolute predatory stillness that Blackwood had learned to associate with Maya finding something very, very wrong. "Master Guns," she said quietly, "you need to see this." He moved to her side. She turned the screen toward him. It showed a roster, complete with photographs, names, ranks, duty assignments, the full base personnel roster for FOB Reaper. But that wasn't what made Blackwood's blood run cold. It was the annotations. 17 names were highlighted in red. Next to each was additional information: home addresses, family member names, known associates in Kabul and surrounding provinces. "CIA officers," Maya said, her voice flat. Undercover assets working in the region. This infiltrator wasn't here to steal server data. He was here to confirm intelligence. Someone already had these names. He was sent to verify them by matching faces to the roster, confirming which personnel on this base are actually intelligence officers. How did they get the names? Maya pulled up another screen. Communications logs, time-stamped. From the early minutes of the power failure, when Garrett had been panicking, shouting into every radio frequency he could access, some of which were open channels, some of which had been monitored. In his panic, in his desperate attempts to regain control, Garrett had broadcasted unencrypted status reports that included personnel movements, including references to intelligence assets needing protection. He'd confirmed what the enemy had suspected. 17 officers, Maya said, and their families, now compromised, now targets. Blackwood felt rage and horror warring in his chest. Can we warn them? Satellite uplink is destroyed. Landlines were cut. Radio frequencies are compromised. We're isolated. Maya's eyes were distant, calculating. Unless what? She looked up at the sky, at the stars, at the vast darkness that surrounded them. And then she smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. The infiltrator's tablet has an encrypted satellite uplink, military grade, non-standard frequency. It's how he was planning to exfiltrate the data he collected. Can you use it? I can do better than that, Maya said. I can reverse the transmission protocol, trace the network back to whoever sent him, and deliver a message they won't forget. She was already typing, her fingers flying across the screen with inhuman speed. Lines of code scrolled past. Encryption protocols cracked like ice under a hammer. 3 minutes later, she looked up. Done. Message sent through their own network. All 17 officers and their families will receive encrypted extraction orders within the next 10 minutes. By dawn, they'll be in safe houses. By this time tomorrow, they'll be out of country. What did you tell whoever sent this guy? Maya's smile widened slightly. I told them that FOB Reaper is now a hardened target, that their infiltrator has been captured, that their network has been compromised, and that if they attempt any action against our personnel or their families, I will personally hunt down every node in their command structure and dismantle them one by one. Will they believe you? I included a complete schematic of their network topology, the real names of 3 of their cell leaders, and the GPS coordinates of 2 safe houses they thought were secure. She closed the tablet. They'll believe me. Blackwood stared at her. Who the hell are you, really? Systemic Correction Unit 7, Maya replied. I identify catastrophic failures, and I fix them. Permanently. That's when they heard it. Distant at first, but building. A rhythmic chopping sound that made the air itself vibrate. Blackwood turned, scanning the darkness. 2 shapes materialized from the night sky, black against black. MH-60 Blackhawks, unmarked, flying without lights, visible only as darker shadows against the stars. They swept over the base once, low and fast, reconnaissance. Then one banked hard, rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and debris, and descended toward the landing pad with the controlled aggression of a bird of prey. The Marines who'd been celebrating the restored power stopped, turned, watched. The helicopter touched down. The engines didn't cut. The rotors kept spinning. The rear ramp dropped. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the dim interior light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the economical precision of a man who'd spent decades in combat zones. He wore a flight suit with a pistol strapped to his thigh. On his collar, even in the darkness, the 2 stars of a rear admiral caught the light. Behind him, a SEAL team disembarked. 6 men bristling with weapons in quiet menace, their faces painted, their movements synchronized. They fanned out with the efficiency of a machine, securing the landing zone, establishing a perimeter. The Admiral strode toward the command post, his gaze sweeping across the jury-rigged power systems. the chemical glow sticks still scattered around, the Marines who stood watching with exhausted, relieved faces. Lieutenant Ashford appeared, snapping to attention, rendering a crisp salute. The Admiral returned it. "Status, Lieutenant." "Sir, all critical systems restored. 3 casualties stable. 1 hostile captured. 0 friendly KIA." "Outstanding." The Admiral's voice carried the gravel of 1,000 combat briefings. "Where's Gunnery Sergeant Garrett?" "Command post, sir." "And Specialist Brennan?" Ashford turned, scanning the darkness. His eyes found Maya, standing beside Blackwood at the perimeter wall. Her gray fatigues dust-covered and grease-stained, her face illuminated by the glow of her tablet. "There, sir, southern perimeter." The Admiral's gaze followed. He looked at Maya for a long moment. "Master Guns," Blackwood came to attention. "Admiral Drake, you sent the after-action report through secure channels?" "Yes, sir. Summary version. Detailed report will follow." "I read it. You wrote, and I quote, 'Specialist Brennan is the most capable operator I have witnessed in 42 years of service.'" Drake's eyes moved back to Maya. "High praise from a man like Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood." "Every word earned, sir," Blackwood replied. Drake nodded slowly. Then he looked back toward the command post, where Garrett was no doubt waiting, preparing his own version of events. "I think," Drake said quietly, "it's time we got the full story. All of us. Together." He turned and walked back toward the command post. The SEAL team followed. Blackwood fell in behind them. Maya picked up her equipment case and brought up the rear, her face showing nothing, her mind already preparing for what came next. The reckoning. The command post smelled of sweat and chemical light and desperation wearing cologne. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Garrett had spent the last 20 minutes preparing. He'd changed into a fresh uniform, pressed and crisp despite the chaos. He'd rehearsed his story, polishing it, finding the right balance of humble heroism and decisive leadership. He'd positioned himself at the center of the room, behind the main tactical display, claiming the symbolic high ground. When Rear Admiral Carson Drake entered, Garrett was ready. He snapped to attention, rendered a salute that was textbook perfect, held it for exactly the prescribed duration. Drake returned it with the economy of a man who'd performed the gesture 10,000 times and had long since stripped it of any wasted motion. "Admiral Drake," Garrett said, his voice pitched to carry authority and respect in equal measure. "Welcome to FOB Reaper, sir. I apologize for the condition of the base. We've had a difficult evening, but I'm pleased to report that through decisive action and proper crisis management protocols, we've stabilized all critical systems and neutralized the hostile threat." Drake said nothing. He simply walked to the corner of the room, leaned against the plywood wall, and folded his arms. His face was unreadable. His pale, gray eyes that had seen everything from Panama to Somalia to the mountains of Afghanistan, gave away nothing. Behind him, the SEAL team took positions along the walls, silent as ghosts. They weren't guarding, they were witnessing. Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood entered next, taking a position beside Drake. Then Lieutenant Ashford, then Chief Voss, then Corpsman Sterling. One by one, the key personnel filed in, until the small command post was crowded with bodies in tension. Maya Brennan entered last. She didn't take a position of prominence. She simply found an empty corner, set down her equipment case, and stood with that absolute stillness that had become her signature. Waiting. Drake let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The kind of silence that made men uncomfortable, that made them want to fill it, to explain, to justify. Finally, he spoke. "Report, Sergeant Garrett, from the beginning. Leave nothing out." Garrett straightened. This was his moment, his chance to reclaim the narrative, to shape the story before it shaped him. "Sir, at approximately 1850 hours, we were hit by what I assessed to be a coordinated cyber-physical attack. Enemy forces disabled our primary and secondary power generation systems through sophisticated electronic warfare techniques. Simultaneously, they compromised our perimeter security and inserted a saboteur to exploit the resulting chaos." He spoke with confidence, his voice steady. This was the story he'd built, and he'd built it well. As acting base commander, I immediately implemented crisis response protocols. I organized my Marines into functional teams: communications, medical, security, engineering. I personally directed the effort to restore power to the aid station, recognizing that we had critical casualties on life support. I led the security team that identified and neutralized the hostile operative attempting to breach our classified server facility. He paused, letting that sink in. Then he continued, his voice taking on the tone of gracious humility. "I won't lie to you, sir. It was a near thing. We were in a bad spot. The attack was sophisticated, well-timed, and executed with precision. But Marine training and discipline saw us through. My men performed admirably under pressure. We took a catastrophic situation and turned it into a tactical victory. 0 friendly casualties, 1 enemy captured, all critical systems restored." He looked directly at Drake, man to man, leader to leader. "I'm proud of my Marines, sir. They proved tonight what the Corps has always known, that there's no challenge we can't overcome, no enemy we can't defeat when we stand together and trust our training." It was a good speech, well-constructed, heroic without being boastful, taking credit while spreading praise. The kind of after-action summary that looked good in reports and impressed senior officers who weren't there to see the reality. Drake listened to every word. His expression never changed. When Garrett finished, the Admiral nodded once. "Thank you, Sergeant. That's a compelling narrative." Drake's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Does anyone else have anything to add to Sergeant Garrett's report?" The room was silent. Marines glanced at each other. No one wanted to be the first to contradict their chain of command, even if that chain of command was demonstrably full of shit. Then Drake turned his head slightly, his eyes finding Maya in her corner. "Specialist Brennan," he said quietly, "you were present for the duration of these events. Does Sergeant Garrett's report align with your observations?" Every eye in the room turned to Maya. She stood there, small and still, and covered in the evidence of 3 hours of brutal work, and met Drake's gaze with those slate-gray eyes that showed nothing and missed nothing. "No, Admiral," she said. Her voice was quiet, clinical, the flat affect of someone reading data from a screen. "It does not." Garrett's jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. "With all due respect, Admiral, this specialist is just a civilian contractor. She wouldn't have the tactical awareness to—" "Sergeant Garrett," Drake interrupted, his voice dropping 20 degrees below freezing. "Be silent." Garrett's mouth snapped shut, his face flushed red, but he said nothing. Drake turned his full attention to Maya. "Present your data, Specialist." "Acknowledged." Maya pulled out her ruggedized tablet, activated it. The screen glowed pale blue in the dim light of the command post. She touched it once, and suddenly the tactical display on the wall came to life, commandeered by her device, showing a timeline with timestamps and data overlays. "The failure was not an external attack," Maya began, her voice never changing tone, never adding emphasis. "Just facts, delivered with the precision of a laser cutting through steel. Root cause indicates cascading systemic collapse originating from power regulator PX7, which was operating at 340% of rated capacity due to chronic overload conditions and deferred maintenance." The display showed a technical schematic of the base's power grid. A single component blinked red. Beside it, maintenance logs appeared, showing 6 separate requests over 8 months, all flagged as critical, all denied. On June 14th, Chief Warrant Officer Voss submitted a maintenance request identifying PX7 as operating outside safe parameters. Request was denied by Gunnery Sergeant Garrett with notation, budget optimization, defer non-essential maintenance. Voss shifted uncomfortably. She'd submitted that request. She'd warned them. No one had listened. On July 2nd, a second request was submitted by the base electrical contractor. Denied. July 9th, a third request from the engineering team. Denied. July 16th, my preliminary diagnostic report. 47 pages, 23 flagged vulnerabilities. Probability of cascade failure within 72 hours, 87% confidence interval. Report submitted at 14:08 hours. The screen showed the report's cover page, the timestamp clearly visible. Report was deleted, unread by Gunnery Sergeant Garrett at 14:10 hours, 90 seconds after receipt. Garrett's face went from red to pale. That's a lie. I never received. The base network logs are immutable, Maya stated, her voice cutting through his protest like a scalpel. They are stored on a write-once system designed to prevent tampering. The deletion is recorded with your user credentials, your terminal identification, and precise timestamp. The data is irrefutable. She tapped the screen again. Audio waveforms appeared. At 18:53 hours, primary power regulator PX7 failed catastrophically. Command and control analysis based on automated audio recording from the command post, which buffers all sound on a rolling 30-minute loop for post-incident investigation, indicates the following response from Gunnery Sergeant Garrett. She pressed play. Garrett's voice filled the room, tinny through the tablet speakers, but unmistakable. Get comms online. Someone do something. This can't be happening. Holloway, what do I do? The waveform showed the audio analysis. Elevated vocal volume, inconsistent frequency, markers consistent with panic response. Beneath it, a counter ticked up. Instances of raised voice with no actionable content. It reached 37 before Maya stopped the playback. Christ, you could have heard a pin drop on the plywood floor. Maya swiped to a new screen. Video footage appeared, split into multiple panels. Power restoration timeline. At 19:02 hours, I entered the aid station. 3 critical casualties on ventilator life support, battery backup showing 4 minutes remaining. I implemented emergency power bypass using vehicle battery, defibrillator interface, and ionic bridge solution. Ventilator restored at 19:05 hours. Witnesses, Navy Corpsman First Class Sterling, Lance Corporal Morrison. One panel of the video showed Maya in the aid station, her hands moving with surgical precision, Sterling watching with an expression somewhere between terror and awe. Another panel showed a different location, timestamp identical. At 19:05 hours, Gunnery Sergeant Garrett's location, command post, standing beside communications console, no physical contact with equipment, no active problem-solving engagement. The thermal footage was damning. Garrett standing still, hands empty, mouth moving but achieving nothing. At 19:36 hours, tertiary generator restoration completed through jury-rigged fuel system, manual ignition protocol, and improvised cooling loop. Solution designed and implemented by me with assistance from Chief Warrant Officer Voss and Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood. Video showed Maya on top of the generator housing, Chief Voss handing up tools, Blackwood holding the manual breaker lever as the system roared to life. Another panel, Garrett still in the command post, same position, same lack of action. At 21:03 hours, hostile operative neutralized at server facility through activation of integrated defense system, a non-lethal deterrent grid I installed during my first 72 hours on base, using personal equipment and without official authorization, as I deemed the server facility insufficiently protected and predicted the authorization process would take longer than the threat timeline allowed. The footage showed the strobes, the foam, the infiltrator going down. It was clinical. EFF, overwhelming. Gunnery Sergeant Garrett's claim, I led the security team that identified and neutralized the hostile operative. Factual analysis. At 21:03 hours, Gunnery Sergeant Garrett's location was command post. He had no visual contact with server facility. He issued no orders regarding the hostile operative. He had no awareness of the threat until after neutralization was complete. The split screen showed it all. Left side, Maya activating the defense grid, Blackwood beside her, watching. Right side, Garrett in the command post, thermal signatures showing he hadn't moved in 40 minutes. Every claim he'd made, every piece of his heroic narrative, systematically dismantled with timestamps, video evidence, audio recordings, and irrefutable data. Maya looked up from her tablet, her slate-gray eyes finding Garrett. Conclusion. Gunnery Sergeant Garrett's after-action report contains 0 accurate statements regarding crisis response. All credit claimed was for actions he did not perform, in locations he did not occupy, during times when he was demonstrably elsewhere. The report is not merely inaccurate, it is a comprehensive fabrication. The silence that followed was suffocating. Garrett stood there, his mouth opening and closing, his hands trembling, his face cycling through shock and rage and something that might have been existential terror. He looked around the room at the faces of his Marines, Marines who'd seen the truth, who'd known he was lying, who were now watching him exposed like a specimen pinned to a board. You can't, his voice cracked. I'm a combat veteran. I served in Desert Storm. I've led Marines for Sergeant Garrett, Drake said, and his voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrible than if he'd shouted. I need you to stop talking, right now. Garrett stopped. His mouth clicked shut. Drake pushed off from the wall. He walked to the center of the room, his presence commanding every atom of attention. He looked at Garrett for a long moment, and his face held something that might have been pity, or might have been disgust, or might have been simple, cold disappointment. I've been in the Navy for 36 years, Drake said quietly. I've commanded SEAL teams in Panama, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. I've seen good men die because of bad leadership. I've seen brilliant operations fail because someone's ego was bigger than their competence. And I've seen what happens when we mistake volume for authority, when we confuse performance for substance, when we let our need to be seen as the hero override our duty to actually be heroic. He turned, addressed the room. There are 2 kinds of failure in military service. The first is the failure of capability, when you simply don't have the skills or knowledge to accomplish the mission. That's forgivable. We train for that. We prepare for that. We build teams precisely because no single person has every capability required. He paused. Let that sink in. The second kind of failure is the failure of character. When you have the resources, the people, the capabilities around you, but your ego prevents you from using them. When you ignore expert advice because accepting it would mean admitting you don't know everything. When you delete warnings because reading them might require you to take action that doesn't make you look good. When you endanger the lives of the people you're sworn to protect because admitting you need help feels like weakness. He turned back to Garrett. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Garrett, you didn't just fail tonight, you created the conditions for failure through 8 months of negligent decision-making. You were warned, repeatedly, by multiple qualified personnel that your base was on the edge of catastrophic collapse. You ignored them. You deleted their reports. You ridiculed their expertise. And when the inevitable happened, you froze. You panicked. And then you lied about what you did in those moments to cover for the fact that you did nothing. Garrett opened his mouth. Drake held up a hand. I'm not finished. Specialist Brennan, the woman you ejected from this base, the woman you publicly humiliated, the woman you dismissed as useless, she saved 3 lives in your aid station. She restored power to your entire base through engineering improvisation that I will be teaching at the Naval War College as an example of field innovation under pressure. She captured a hostile operative and prevented a counterintelligence disaster that would have compromised 17 CIA officers and their families. Drake's voice dropped even lower. She did all of this after you ordered her off the base. She did it without your authority, without your permission, without your acknowledgement. She did it because it needed to be done, and she was the only person here with the capability and the will to do it. He paused, let that settle. And then you stood in front of me and claimed credit for her work. You looked me in the eye and lied. Not about a small thing, not about an honest mistake. You constructed an elaborate fiction in which you were the hero of a story where you were actually the villain. Garrett's legs looked like they might give out. He reached back, steadied himself against the tactical display. Do you have anything to say? Drake asked. Garrett's mouth worked. Sir, I've been a Marine for 23 years. I have a combat action ribbon. What you have, Drake interrupted, is a dishonorable discharge pending formal court-martial proceedings. What you have is the end of your career and the permanent loss of your retirement benefits. What you have is the knowledge that every Marine in this room will remember you not as a leader or a warrior or anything honorable, but as the man who endangered their lives to protect his ego. He gestured to the SEAL team. 2 of them stepped forward. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Garrett, you are hereby relieved of all duties and will be confined to quarters pending transport to Camp Leatherneck for formal charges. The charges will include willful, negligent, dereliction of duty resulting in endangerment of personnel, destruction of critical safety documentation, falsification of official reports, and conduct unbecoming. You are dismissed. The 2 SEALs moved to flank Garrett, not touching him, not yet, but their presence was absolute. Garrett looked around the room one final time, seeing the faces that had been his audience, his chorus, his affirmation. Holloway and Kendrick wouldn't meet his eyes. Ashford looked at him with something like pity. Chief Voss's face was stone. Sterling stared at the floor. Not one person spoke in his defense. Not one person moved to support him. The pack had abandoned the Alpha. And the Alpha was nothing without the pack. The SEALs let him out. His footsteps on the plywood floor sounded hollow, diminished. The door closed behind him, and he was gone. Drake turned to Blackwood. Master Gunnery Sergeant, you have the base until a permanent commander is assigned. That should be within 48 hours. Blackwood came to attention. Aye, sir. I've read your service record. Berlin, Mogadishu, Fallujah. You've seen it all. You know how to lead. I'll do my best, sir. Drake nodded. Then he turned, slowly, deliberately, until he was facing Maya. She stood in her corner, still and silent, her equipment case at her feet, her hands loose at her sides. She didn't come to attention, didn't salute. She wasn't military in the traditional sense, and they both knew it. Drake walked toward her, stopped 3 feet away. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. This small woman who just dismantled a base crisis and a man's career with equal efficiency. Specialist Maya Brennan, he said, his voice formal now, carrying the weight of institutional authority. Systemic Correction Unit 7. They told me you were good. They told me you were the best operator in the entire SCU program. They told me you were a ghost, a legend they whisper about at Fort Meade in Langley. He paused. They didn't do you justice. Then, in a gesture that shocked every Marine in the room, Rear Admiral Carson Drake came to attention and rendered a slow, formal salute to an enlisted specialist with no rank insignia on her collar. The room held its breath. Maya looked at him. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of an emotion she usually kept locked away. Then she returned the salute, her movement crisp and precise. "Thank you for your service, Specialist," Drake said. "You saved lives tonight. You prevented a security catastrophe. You did what we sent you here to do. You identified the system failure, and you corrected it." Behind Drake, one by one, the others began to salute, Blackwood first, his weathered face showing profound respect. Then Chief Voss, then Corpsman Sterling, then Ashford, then every Marine in the command post, regardless of rank, regardless of ego, rendering honors to the woman who'd saved them. They weren't saluting a rank. They weren't saluting a position or a title or a place in the hierarchy. They were saluting competence. They were saluting courage. They were saluting the truth. Maya held the salute for the prescribed duration, then lowered her hand. Her face remained composed, but something in her eyes suggested this moment mattered more than she would ever say. Drake lowered his hand. "I have authorization from Naval Special Warfare Command to offer you a direct commission. Lieutenant Colonel, SEAL Team 17, our newest developmental warfare unit focused on systemic analysis and unconventional problem solving. You'd be the youngest O5 in the command. Full authority, unlimited budget, pick your own team, write your own mission parameters." The room was silent. Every Marine watched, waiting to hear what she would say. Maya considered for a long moment, longer than she usually took to make decisions. She looked at Drake, then at Blackwood, then at the faces of the Marines who just saluted her. "I respectfully decline, Admiral," she said quietly. Drake's eyebrows rose slightly. "May I ask why?" "Rank creates hierarchy. Hierarchy requires adherence to protocol. Protocol creates delay between identification of a problem and implementation of a solution." Her voice was still flat, still clinical, but something beneath it now, something almost human. "That delay is where people die. My mother died in that delay, waiting for authorization to restore Pentagon communications during the September 11th attacks. She had the capability, she had the knowledge, but the chain of command said wait, so she waited, and the fire reached her before the authorization did. She paused, and for the first time, her voice carried the faintest edge of emotion. "I won't wait, Admiral. I can't. When I see a system failing, and I have the capability to fix it, I act. I don't ask permission. I don't file reports. I don't route requests through channels. I just fix it." That approach is incompatible with commissioned officer responsibilities. "I'm more effective operating outside the hierarchy." Systems don't need commanders. They need correction. Drake studied her face. Then he nodded slowly. "The offer stands, permanently. If you ever change your mind, and you might, eventually, because everyone needs a team, you call me directly. Day or night, I will make it happen within 6 hours." "Respectfully, sir, I won't change my mind." Drake smiled, and it was the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him. "That's what makes you so damn good at what you do." He turned to address the room. "All of you saw what happened here tonight. You saw the difference between leadership that's all performance and leadership that's all substance. You saw what happens when we prioritize ego over mission. And you saw what one person with the right skills, the right mindset, and the absolute conviction to act can accomplish." He looked at Ashford specifically. "Lieutenant, you came here fresh from the academy with your head full of leadership theories and organizational doctrine. Tonight you got an education worth more than 4 years of classes. Do you understand the lesson?" Ashford straightened. "Yes, sir. Competence matters more than rank. Substance matters more than style. And when someone has the expertise to solve a problem, you don't ask them to justify themselves. You get out of their way and let them work." "Exactly right," Drake nodded. "Remember this night, all of you. Remember that the quietest voice in the room is often the wisest. That the person who doesn't need to announce their competence is usually the most competent. That true leadership isn't about making yourself look good. It's about making the mission succeed, no matter who gets the credit." He turned back to Maya. Anything else we should know? Any other crises I should be aware of? Maya consulted her tablet. Base infrastructure is stable for the next 18 hours. After that, the tertiary generator will require refueling and maintenance. Primary power grid can be restored in approximately 48 hours with proper components. I've compiled a complete repair manifest with priority sequencing. It's in your inbox now. Outstanding. Drake checked his watch. My transport's waiting. We'll be taking the captured hostile and his equipment back to Camp Leatherneck for interrogation. Master Guns, the base is yours. He started toward the door, then paused. Turned back. Specialist Brennan, one more thing. Maya looked up. Your mother, Catherine Brennan. She didn't fail on September 11th. The system around her failed. She did everything right. She identified the problem. She had the solution. But the protocol said wait. The failure wasn't hers. It was the system that valued procedure over action. Maya's face didn't change, but her eyes held something that might have been grief or gratitude or the complicated mixture of both. You became what you are because of what happened to her. You made yourself into the person who doesn't wait, who doesn't ask, who just fixes the problem. That's not a failure of character. That's the highest form of honor. You made sure her death meant something. You made sure no one else would die the same way if you could prevent it. He held her gaze. She'd be proud of you, and so am I. He left. The SEAL team followed, moving like shadows. The rotor sounds built outside, and then the Blackhawks lifted, their noise fading into the distance until there was only the desert silence and the hum of the newly restored generator. Maya stood in the command post, surrounded by Marines who just witnessed a reckoning, and allowed herself 3 seconds of something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite pride, but was definitely human. Then she picked up her equipment case. I need to check the fuel levels on the tertiary generator, she said to no one in particular, and rebalance the electrical load distribution, and verify the aid station's backup battery charging systems. I'll have a complete status report ready by 0600. She walked toward the door. Specialist, Blackwood called after her. She stopped, turned. Your mother in Berlin, Blackwood said, his voice rough with emotion. I never got to thank her for saving my life that night. So I'm thanking you now. For her, for tonight, for everything you are. Maya looked at him, this old warrior who'd seen decades of war and peace and everything in between, who'd recognized what she was from the moment she'd arrived because he'd met someone like her before. She would have remembered you, Maya said quietly. She kept a journal. Berlin, 1982. Young private, good instincts, listened when I talked. She didn't write much about people, but she wrote about you. Blackwood's weathered face showed something that might have been emotion. He nodded once, unable to speak. Maya turned and walked out into the night, her silhouette sharp against the lights of the base she'd saved, moving with purpose toward the next problem that needed solving. Behind her, Lieutenant Ashford looked at Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood. Master Guns, he said quietly. What is she, really? The official designation says Systems Analyst, but that doesn't even begin to cover what we just witnessed. Blackwood watched Maya disappear into the darkness, moving toward the generator with that economical stride that wasted no energy. She's what the Corps needs but doesn't quite know how to use, he said finally. She's the person who sees the system, understands the system, and becomes the system. She's the ghost in the machine who makes sure the machine doesn't fail. And she's the rarest kind of operator there is, the kind who doesn't need glory or recognition or credit. She just needs the mission to succeed. He turned to Ashford. You asked earlier how to become like her. The answer is you don't. You can't. She was forged by the worst day in American history. She remade herself into a weapon against systemic failure. But what you can do is learn from her. Learn that competence is quiet, that expertise doesn't need to announce itself, that the best leaders are sometimes the ones who don't want the title, and that when you find someone like her, you don't question them, you don't slow them down, You don't let your ego get in the way. You just let them work. Ashford nodded slowly. I understand, Master Guns. Good, because in about 6 hours, when the adrenaline wears off and reality sets in, every Marine on this base is going to have questions, and you're going to help me answer them. Starting with, why didn't we listen to her from the beginning, and ending with, how do we make sure this never happens again? Yes, Master Guns. Blackwood picked up his rifle, checked the chamber out of habit, and headed for the door. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow we rebuild. But we rebuild better this time. With Specialist Brennan's recommendations. All of them. 3 weeks passed in a blur of debriefings and reports, and the endless bureaucratic machinery that ground on long after the actual crisis had been resolved. FOB Reaper received a new commander, a quiet colonel who read Maya's entire report, all 47 pages, twice before making a single decision. The primary power grid was rebuilt to her exact specifications. The tertiary generator received full maintenance and quarterly testing protocols. The base passed its next 3 cybersecurity audits with perfect scores. Master Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood retired 4 months later with full honors. In his final report, he wrote 3 sentences about Maya. She saved us. She taught us. We will not forget. Lieutenant Ashford requested assignment to a systemic analysis training program. He never became Maya Brennan, but he became someone who understood why people like her mattered. No one ever thanked Maya officially. There was no medal, no commendation, no mention of her name in any after-action report that would be seen by anyone outside a very small circle of people with very high clearances. That was fine. She hadn't done it for recognition. She'd done it because a system had failed, and she was the only one who could fix it. And somewhere, in the place where data meets duty, her mother was watching. Proud. 3 weeks later, Maya Brennan stood in a small ready room aboard the USS Nimitz, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. The carrier was a floating city, 70,000 tons of steel and aircraft, and 5,000 souls, all moving through the water with purpose and power. She'd been pulled from FOB Reaper the morning after the incident, extracted quietly, no fanfare, no ceremony, just a helicopter at dawn and a flight to Bagram, then Germany, then stateside, then back out to the Pacific. Systemic correction units didn't stay in one place. They went where systems were failing. Her tablet chimed. A new message appeared, Priority Alpha, encrypted with protocols that required biometric authentication and 3 separate verification steps. She opened it. Priority Alpha, SCU-7. Tasking location, USS Roosevelt, DDG-80, currently Pacific Fleet Patrol Sector 7. Situation, Commanding Officer Captain Harold Westbrook refusing evacuation order despite critical hull breach following collision with submerged debris. Ship is taking water. Engineering assessment indicates catastrophic structural failure imminent within 12 to 18 hours. Rationale from CO. I will not abandon my ship over minor damage. This vessel and crew are my responsibility. We can handle the repairs underway. Actual assessment from Fleet Engineering. Hull breach is 3.2 meters below waterline in compartment 4-52-2-L. Water ingress rate exceeds pump capacity. Structural integrity compromised. Recommended action: immediate evacuation and scuttle procedures. Crew complement 340 souls. Co-response to evacuation order refused. Placed executive officer under arrest for undermining command authority when XO attempted to initiate emergency procedures. Authorization. Full corrective measures approved. Time critical. Minimize casualties. Preserve vessel if possible, but crew survival is priority 1. Maya read it twice, absorbed the data, calculated probabilities, assessed timelines. She closed the tablet, reached for her equipment case, checked its contents with the ritual precision of someone who'd performed this action 1,000 times. Then she keyed her throat mic. SCU-7 to air operations. Request immediate transport to USS Roosevelt's coordinates. Acknowledge 7. Helo spins up in 5 mics. Weather's rough. You sure about this? I'm sure. Systems require correction. She stood, shouldered her case, and walked toward the flight deck. Outside, the Pacific wind howled, and somewhere on the horizon, a ship was sinking because a man's pride was bigger than his judgment. She'd seen this before. Not the specifics, but the pattern. The ego that refused to accept reality. The authority that confused stubbornness with strength. The leader who'd rather die than admit he was wrong. She'd fixed it before. She'd fix it again. As she climbed into the helicopter, strapping herself into the canvas seat, she thought about her mother. About Catherine Brennan in that Pentagon server room, working until the smoke and flames had made it impossible to breathe. About the choice her mother had made, to act despite protocol, to try despite the risk, to die with her hands on the equipment because saving lives mattered more than following rules. Maya had spent 18 years becoming her mother's legacy, 18 years making sure that systems didn't fail, that people didn't die waiting for authorization, that competence mattered more than ego. And she wasn't finished. The helicopter lifted from the deck. The carrier fell away below. The Pacific stretched vast and gray beneath them. And somewhere in that immensity, 340 people were counting on decisions they didn't know had been made, being saved by a ghost they'd never meet. Some ghosts haunt. Some ghosts hunt. Some ghosts save. Specialist Maya Brennan was the rarest kind. A ghost who existed to prove that systems could be stronger than the egos that ran them, that competence could overcome authority, that one person with the right skills and absolute conviction could change everything. And somewhere in the place where data and duty intersect, in the space between protocol and action, Catherine Brennan was watching. Proud. The helicopter banked toward the coordinates. Maya closed her eyes, felt the vibration of the rotors through her bones, and began planning. Systems failed. She corrected them. It was what she did. It was all she'd ever do. It was enough.